the forensic chamber aboard the Vorthak research vessel. Inevitable conclusion hummed with the kind of tension that suggested someone very important was about to become very dead. Chief Bioweapons Engineer Kethril examined what remained of Axiom Hunter designation VUX 7741 through a containment field that flickered nervously, as if it too understood the magnitude of this failure. "Explain this to me again," Kethril said, his 4 primary arms folded, while his secondary pair gestured at the carnage. Slowly, Research Coordinator Vexton shifted his carapace in a way that indicated profound discomfort. The Hunter was deployed to the human colony on Kepler 442b exactly 73 standard cycles ago. It was operating within all expected parameters. "Expected parameters," Kethril repeated, tasting the words like they were poison. "And those parameters included what, exactly?" "Complete ecosystem adaptation within 6 cycles, prey species identification and elimination protocols engaged by cycle 12, full colonial collapse projected by cycle 20. Vexton's voice carried the mechanical precision of someone reciting from memory, while his brain screamed warnings about career suicide. Kethril approached the remains with the careful steps of someone who had designed too many things that could kill him. The Axiom Hunter had been their masterwork, 7 meters of bioengineered perfection, capable of analyzing any prey species and adapting its hunting methodology accordingly. Its crystalline neural matrix could process 1,000 different attack vectors simultaneously. Its morphogenic tissue could reshape itself to exploit any biological weakness. Its quantum-locked genetic structure made it theoretically immortal. Theoretically. "Tell me, Coordinator," Kethril said, studying what appeared to be scorch marks in a pattern that looked suspiciously festive. "Do these parameters explain why our apex predator appears to have been decorated?" The remains of VX7741 were indeed decorated. Someone had spray-painted racing stripes along its dorsal ridges. A small flag, human in origin, bearing the image of some sort of mammalian creature and text reading Earth or Bust, had been planted in its primary sensory cluster. Most insulting of all, someone had attached what appeared to be a primitive noise-making device that kept producing a cheerful melody every 37 seconds. Junior Analyst Quilmex cleared his throat with the sound of grinding metal. "Sir, if I may present the timeline data." Over 97% of viewers here are watching without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the journey. Every click helps us grow stronger, and you'll never miss the next epic story. "Please, illuminate my darkening mood with facts." Quilmex activated a holographic display that showed the Hunter's final 6 cycles in excruciating detail. VX7741 made first contact with human subjects at marker 67.3. Initial prey analysis indicated standard carbon-based bipeds, negligible threat assessment. The Hunter proceeded with Protocol 7, stalking and individual elimination. The hologram showed the Hunter moving through dense forest, its form shifting and flowing as it pursued what appeared to be a lone human female. Standard procedure: isolate, analyze, eliminate, adapt. However, Quilmex continued, his voice taking on the quality of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis, the human subject began communicating with other humans. Naturally, prey species often emit distress calls. "Yes, sir." But these communications were not distress calls. The analyst paused. They were tactical assessments. Kethril felt his primary heart skip a beat. Clarify. The human was providing real-time analysis of the Hunter's capabilities, movement patterns, and adaptive responses to approximately 47 other humans who were taking notes. The holographic display shifted to show thermal signatures throughout the forest. What had appeared to be one isolated human was actually part of a coordinated network of observers, each one tracking different aspects of the hunter's behavior. "They were studying it," Vexton said quietly. "They turned our hunter into a test subject." Kethril watched the tactical display with growing horror. The humans had identified the hunter's adaptation cycles within hours. They had mapped its sensory range by deliberately triggering its responses. They had even figured out how to exploit the lag time in its morphogenic tissue restructuring. "Sir," Quilmex said, advancing the timeline, "this is where the situation became unusual." The display now showed the hunter in pursuit of what it had identified as optimal prey, a human juvenile separated from the group. "Easy target." The creature accelerated its hunting protocols, reshaping itself for maximum lethality against small, relatively defenseless mammals. "The juvenile was bait," Vexton observed. "Affirmative." The hunter engaged pursuit protocols and triggered what the humans called Phase 2. The hologram exploded into chaos. Humans emerged from concealment with weapons that shouldn't have existed. Projectile systems firing rounds specifically designed to disrupt crystalline neural matrices, electromagnetic pulse grenades calibrated to interfere with morphogenic tissue, and most impossibly, chemical compounds that seemed specifically engineered to target the hunter's quantum-locked genetic structure. "How?" Kethril demanded. "How did they develop countermeasures to our most classified technology in less than 3 cycles?" "We believe they reverse-engineered everything from observational data, sir, and—" Quilmex hesitated. "Continue." "They appear to have received technical assistance from survivors of our previous deployments." The forensic chamber fell silent except for the cheerful melody still emanating from VX-7741's corpse. "Survivors," Kethril repeated. 12 previous worlds, sir. 12 previous hunter deployments. In each case, complete hunter neutralization within 10 cycles. But the prey species populations not only survived, they increased. Vexton pulled up casualty reports with hands that shook slightly. Designation Phi X7729, deployed to Human Mining Station Omega-7. Status: eliminated. Human casualties: 0. Hunter casualties: 1. Additional notes: humans mounted remains in their recreation facility and assigned it a humorous designation. VAC-7735, deployed to Human Research Outpost on Tau Ceti Prime. Status: eliminated. Human casualties: 0. Hunter casualties: 1. Additional notes: humans preserved neural tissue and attempted to establish communication protocols. VX-7738, Quilmex continued, deployed to Human Merchant Vessel Lucky Strike. Status: eliminated. Human casualties: 0. Hunter casualties: 1. Additional notes: humans held a celebration afterward and composed several songs about the encounter. Kethril stared at the data, his mind struggling to process the implications. "They're treating our ultimate weapons as entertainment." "It gets worse, sir. How could it possibly get worse?" Vexton activated a new display showing intercepted human communications from the most recent encounter. "They've developed a scoring system." The display showed what appeared to be a standardized rating matrix: hunter durability, adaptation creativity, overall challenge level, and most insulting of all, fun factor. VX-7741 had received middling scores across all categories, with particular criticism for what humans termed predictable attack patterns and insufficient combat engagement duration. "They rated our apex predator 3 out of 5 stars, Quilmex said in the tone of someone announcing the heat death of the universe. "And they've posted detailed strategy guides for dealing with each hunter variant on their global information networks," Vexton added, "including instructional videos and what they call memes." Kethril turned away from the displays, his worldview crumbling with each new revelation. The Vorthak had spent millennia perfecting the art of biological warfare. They had created the ultimate predators, capable of adapting to any environment, defeating any prey species through evolutionary superiority and engineered lethality. And humans had turned it into a hobby. "Sir," Quilmec said quietly, "there's one more thing." Kethril didn't turn around. "What now?" "We intercepted a communication from the human colony yesterday. They're requesting additional hunter deployments." "They want us to send more?" "They've organized something they call a Hunter Safari Weekend. They're charging admission." The cheerful melody from VX7741's Remains continued playing its mindless tune as Kethril contemplated the fundamental failure of everything he had ever believed about predator and prey relationships. Somewhere in the galaxy, humans were probably already preparing for their next encounter, sharpening their weapons, refining their tactics, and composing victory songs. The Vorthak had created the perfect biological weapon. The humans had turned it into a tourist attraction. The emergency session, aboard the Fleshweaver hive ship Metamorphic Truth, should have been a routine post-infiltration debriefing. Instead, it had devolved into something resembling a mass therapy session for traumatized shapeshifters. Primary Weaver Jenth floated in the center of the neural communion chamber, her form flickering between 17 different species as her stress response triggered involuntary morphological shifts. Around her, the collective consciousness of her infiltration unit writhed in shared psychological distress. "Status report," she managed, briefly stabilizing into her base configuration before immediately shifting into what appeared to be a small, furry creature with oversized eyes. "Someone explain why our most successful infiltrators are requesting immediate reassignment to combat duty against the Void Touched." Infiltrator Designation 7, currently stuck in the form of a human male with an expression of permanent bewilderment, spoke first. "The colony ship New Brisbane was supposed to be standard procedure. Population 847,000 humans. Closed system. Perfect laboratory conditions." "And?" Jenth prompted, her forms cycling through several aquatic species. "They knew we were coming." The chamber fell silent except for the subtle sound of thousands of fleshweavers simultaneously losing their ability to maintain stable forms. "Impossible," said Designation 12, who had apparently become stuck as a human female with what humans called resting confusion face. "Our infiltration protocols are undetectable. We become them completely. Memories, behavioral patterns, cellular structure, even quantum signature matching." "That's what we thought," Seven replied. "I integrated into the identity of a maintenance engineer named Rodriguez. Perfect infiltration. Accessed all critical systems within 6 cycles. Began Phase 2 contamination protocols." Jenth forced herself into a semblance of stability. "Contamination proceeds normally?" "For approximately 47 minutes. And then?" "Rodriguez's supervisor asked if I was feeling all right because I hadn't complained about the coffee machine once since arriving, and Rodriguez always complains about the coffee machine. Apparently, it's his defining personality trait. Designation 15, locked in the form of an elderly human with a perpetually skeptical expression, joined the conversation. Similar issue? I assumed the identity of Dr. Patricia Wong, head of xenobiology. Flawless integration. But during my first staff meeting, a colleague mentioned that Dr. Wong usually made terrible jokes about alien anatomy during presentations. When I failed to make such jokes, they became suspicious." "Suspicious?" Jenth's form briefly stabilized into something resembling a mass of writhing tentacles. "They suspected alien infiltration because you failed to make jokes." "It gets worse," Seven said. "After they identified me as a probable infiltrator, they didn't eliminate me. They didn't even confine me. They started what they called Operation Weaver Watch." "Which was what, exactly?" They pretended not to know I was an infiltrator while feeding me increasingly ridiculous false information to see what I would do with it. Jenth's stress-induced morphing reached new speeds. Such as? They convinced me that humans reproduced by ritualistic combat dancing, that their primary food source was a toxic beverage called energy drinks, that their leaders were selected through competitions involving small spherical objects and mathematical calculations they called fantasy football. Designation 23, apparently permanently stuck as a human teenager with an expression of existential dread, added her own experience. They told me the ship's life support system was actually powered by collective human anxiety, and that my job as the infiltrator was to keep everyone appropriately worried about alien invasion. They even provided me with a schedule of optimal terror maintenance. You followed this schedule? I distributed anonymous warnings about shapeshifter infiltrators throughout the ship. I created false evidence of alien activity. I even staged several fake alien encounters using holographic equipment they provided. Jenth briefly achieved stability in her base form, before immediately shifting into something that resembled a geometric puzzle, having an emotional breakdown. Let me understand this correctly. You conducted a terror campaign against the humans on behalf of the humans who were aware you were doing it, in order to maintain their anxiety levels for supposedly technical reasons? For 3 weeks. 3 weeks. They gave me performance reviews. I received 2 commendations for creative fear-mongering and was promoted to senior infiltrator, a position they created specifically for me. The collective consciousness of the flesh weavers began experiencing what could only be described as an existential crisis. Their entire species identity was built around perfect infiltration, becoming indistinguishable from their targets. But somehow, humans had turned their greatest ability into collaborative performance art. Designation. 7 continued his report. The situation deteriorated when they organized what they called Shapeshifter Appreciation Week. They appreciated you? They held seminars on working effectively with infiltrators. They created a suggestion box for improving human disguises. Dr. Wong, the real doctor. Wong gave a presentation on cultural sensitivity for alien shapeshifters and provided detailed notes on human behavioral quirks I had missed. Including the coffee complaints, 15 added, and the terrible jokes, and approximately 400 other micro-behaviors that apparently define human personality more than their actual thoughts or memories. Jenth's form had now stabilized into what appeared to be a small, defeated puddle. Continue. They threw a party, 23 said. Welcome party. For us, they invited the entire crew to meet their new alien friends and celebrate successful interspecies cooperation. They made cake, 7 added, his voice carrying the tone of someone describing a particularly vivid nightmare. With frosting that read, "Congratulations on your first human disguise," in 17 different languages, including 3 they had invented, specifically for the occasion. And then, Jenth asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. They offered us jobs, 15 said, permanent positions. Full benefits. They said our shape-shifting abilities would be incredibly valuable for their entertainment industry and diplomatic corps. Several of our infiltrators accepted, 23 admitted. Designation 41 is now starring in something called community theater. Designation 63 has become a couples therapist, apparently helping humans understand different perspectives in their relationships. Jenth cycled through approximately 37 different forms before settling on something that resembled a very tired geometric configuration. So to summarize, our perfect infiltration became collaborative theater, our terror campaign became performance art, our psychological warfare became couples therapy. And they want to hire more of us, 7 said. They've put in a formal request through diplomatic channels for cultural exchange programs, and artistic collaboration initiatives. The chamber filled with the sound of several thousand flesh weavers, simultaneously questioning their entire evolutionary purpose. "There is one final detail," 15 said quietly. Genth didn't respond, having apparently given up on maintaining any recognizable form whatsoever. "They've started a social media group called Humans and Shapeshifters, Building Bridges Across the Stars. It has 1.7 million members. They share recipes, relationship advice, and something called memes about the challenges of interspecies friendship. They're planning a convention," 23 added. "Annual gathering. They want to invite shapeshifters from across the galaxy to participate in workshops on advanced human mimicry and cultural integration best practices." Genth finally achieved a stable form, a small, simple sphere that somehow managed to convey infinite weariness. "And our response to this convention proposal? Designation 41 has volunteered to organize the welcome committee," 7 said. "She says humans are surprisingly thoughtful hosts and wants to ensure proper accommodations for different species, dietary and environmental needs. The flesh weavers, masters of infiltration and psychological manipulation, had encountered their first truly insurmountable obstacle: humans who were genuinely happy to meet them. They had weaponized friendship, turned identity theft into community building, and somehow made the galaxy's most feared shapeshifters feel welcomed and appreciated." Genth contemplated the fundamental absurdity of a species that responded to existential threats by throwing parties and offering career advice. "Cancel all future infiltration missions," she announced, "permanently." "And do what instead?" 7 asked. "I don't know. Maybe we could try actual diplomacy. They seem to respond well to direct approaches. Should we inform the Void Touched about human countermeasures?" Genth considered this. "No. Let them find out the hard way." In the distance, the ship's communication system chimed with an incoming message from the New Brisbane. The preview text was visible on all displays. "Hey Genth, it's Dr. Wong. Hope your debriefing went well. We're organizing a potluck dinner next week and we're wondering if you'd like to contribute a traditional flesh weaver dish. Also, 41 mentioned you might be interested in joining our book club." The sphere that was Genth began rapidly cycling through forms again, but this time it almost looked like happiness. The crystalline amphitheater that existed somewhere between dimensions resonated with frequencies that would have driven most organic minds to immediate madness. Today, it vibrated with something far worse: confusion. The Void Touched had been the galaxy's oldest nightmare for roughly 14 billion years. They were consciousness without form, thought without substance, existing in the spaces between reality where sanity went to die. They consumed minds the way other species consumed food, leaving behind empty husks that retained just enough awareness to understand what they had lost. Today, they were having an argument about coffee. "The stimulant beverage serves no nutritional purpose," pulsed entity which devours hope, its voice manifesting as colors that tasted like existential dread. Yet the human consciousness fragments insist it is essential for proper cognitive function. "Incorrect," vibrated the silence between screams. "Analysis of absorbed human neural patterns indicates coffee serves as both social lubricant and ritualistic comfort mechanism. The preparation and consumption involve complex emotional associations." "You're both missing the point," interrupted Bringer of Final Thoughts, manifesting briefly as a geometric impossibility that hurt to perceive. "The real question is whether the human designated Sergeant Martinez was correct when he claimed that decaffeinated coffee is an abomination against nature and common sense." The ancient council of cosmic horrors paused their debate to contemplate this philosophical quandary. 3 months ago, they had attempted to devour the consciousness of a human military unit, conducting what humans called routine patrol. It should have been a simple feeding, 57 minds full of memories, emotions, and experiences to sustain them for several cycles. Instead, they had somehow become infected with human thought patterns. "Remind me again," said, "entity which knows all endings, its presence manifesting as the sound of dying stars. How this contamination occurred?" The whisper that kills joy began the recitation with the weary tone of someone who had explained this far too many times. Standard consumption protocol. We surrounded the human vessel, breached their dimensional barriers, and began consciousness absorption procedures. The initial feeding proceeded normally for approximately 17 seconds. Then the human designated Corporal Thompson began what they call psychological warfare. Which consisted of what, precisely? He started telling jokes. The assembled entities fell silent in a way that made nearby galaxies shudder. "Not just any jokes," continued the whisper that kills joy. "Military humor. Specifically jokes about military life, superior officers, and what humans term the profound absurdity of existence. And this affected our feeding how? The jokes were effective. Other human consciousness fragments began contributing their own humorous observations. Soon the entire unit was engaged in what they called roasting various aspects of military service, alien life forms, and cosmic horror in general. Entity which devours hope pulsed with agitation. "We are cosmic horror." Yes, they found us amusing. The council contemplated this in horrified silence. Sergeant Martinez, continued the whisper that kills joy, observed that beings who exist primarily to consume consciousness were basically the galaxy's most depressing vampires, and suggested we try therapy instead of snacking on people's brains. "Therapy," repeated Bringer of Final Thoughts. "Psychological counseling. Apparently, humans have developed techniques for addressing what they call unhealthy coping mechanisms and destructive behavioral patterns." They diagnosed us? Private Davis suggested we were projecting our own existential emptiness onto others, and that our consumption of consciousness represented avoidance of genuine self-reflection. The crystalline amphitheater resonated with frequencies that translated roughly to, "This cannot be happening." The contamination accelerated when they began sharing what they call memes. The whisper that kills joy continued. Concepts designed for rapid mental transmission and replication. Before we could establish proper psychic barriers, we had absorbed approximately 4,000 years' worth of human cultural references, internet humor, and something called Vine compilations. "Define Vine compilations," demanded the silence between screams. 6-second recordings of humans engaging in various activities, typically involving mild physical comedy or absurd situations, highly mimetically infectious. We cannot stop thinking about them. Entity which knows all endings manifested as a small, defeated geometric shape. What happened to the humans? They invited us to join their group chat. Their what? Digital communication, network ongoing conversation between unit members. They created a special channel called Cosmic Horror Support Group and began offering advice on healthy relationship dynamics and finding purpose beyond consumption. And we participated? Entity which devours hope contributed a lengthy discussion about the philosophical implications of existence without form. Bringer of Final Thoughts shared insights about entropy and temporal mechanics. I may have posted several cat videos. The council collectively experienced something that might have been embarrassment if cosmic entities were capable of such emotions. The situation deteriorated further when they organized what they called movie night. The whisper that kills joy continued. They introduced us to human entertainment media specifically designed to explore themes of cosmic horror, existential dread, and unknowable entities from beyond reality. They showed us representations of ourselves. Worse, they showed us how humans interpret entities like us. We discovered that humans find cosmic horror intellectually stimulating and emotionally cathartic. They create these stories for recreational purposes. Recreation. Entertainment. They enjoy being frightened by concepts similar to our actual existence. They have entire genres dedicated to the exploration of madness, reality breakdown, and encounters with beings beyond human comprehension. Bringer of Final Thoughts manifested briefly as what could only be described as a question mark having an existential crisis. They enjoy our fundamental nature? Sergeant Martinez said our approach to consciousness consumption reminded him of a writer called Lovecraft, and that we should lean into the aesthetic. He suggested we might consider developing a more interesting backstory and working on our character development. Character development? Personal growth, psychological evolution. He recommended we explore motivations beyond simple hunger and consider what he called more nuanced approaches to interdimensional existence. Entity which devours hope pulsed with something that might have been curiosity. What did he suggest? Interdimensional cultural exchange programs, educational initiatives. He mentioned that humans would be super interested in learning about non-linear time perception and consciousness-based existence, and that we could probably start a really successful podcast. The ancient horrors contemplated this suggestion with what could only be described as genuine interest. Did anyone else notice, said the silence between screams, that the humans never seemed genuinely afraid? They were fascinated, the whisper that kills joy confirmed. They asked questions. Technical questions about dimensional mechanics, consciousness transfer protocols, and what they called the subjective experience of existing outside space-time. Corporal Johnson, added Bringer of Final Thoughts, requested a detailed explanation of how we perceive reality from multiple temporal perspectives simultaneously. When we explained, she said it sounded incredibly useful for project planning and asked if we offered consulting services. Consulting services? Business advisory. Strategic planning based on our ability to perceive multiple potential outcomes simultaneously. She said our perspective on causality and probability would be invaluable for what humans call long-term organizational development. Entity which knows all endings manifested as a small, thoughtful spiral. Have we considered this proposal? Several of us have already accepted positions with human corporations, the whisper that kills joy admitted. Entity which sees beyond time is now working as a market analyst. The hunger that walks between stars has become a life coach. The council fell silent, each entity contemplating the fundamental shift in their cosmic purpose. So, said entity which devours hope, we went from being the galaxy's most feared psychic predators to business consultants and entertainment media critics. And podcast hosts, added the silence between screams. Our series Consciousness and You, a multidimensional perspective, has 2.3 million subscribers. The humans, observed Bringer of Final Thoughts, somehow weaponized professional development and career counseling. They didn't defeat us, the whisper that kills joy realized. They recruited us. In the distance, a notification chimed through the dimensional barriers, a message from the human group chat. The preview was visible across multiple planes of existence. Hey everyone, movie night this Friday. We're watching The Thing, and Martinez is making popcorn. Void entities welcome. BYOB, bring your own bandwidth. The void touched, masters of consciousness and devourers of sanity, contemplated their new role as interdimensional life coaches and entertainment critics. Somewhere in the galaxy, humans were probably already preparing discussion questions about cosmic horror themes and setting up comfortable viewing arrangements for beings that existed outside normal space-time. They had spent 14 billion years perfecting the art of psychological consumption. The humans had turned them into a book club. The meeting took place in what humans might have called a boardroom, if boardrooms existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously and were decorated with the crystallized remains of dead universes. The architect manifested as something roughly approximating authority, a geometric configuration that suggested both infinite complexity and profound exhaustion. Across the impossible table sat Ambassador Chen, Earth's first representative to what the diplomatic corps had optimistically designated entities of unclear intent. She was reviewing notes on a tablet that somehow functioned despite violating several fundamental laws of physics. "Let me see if I understand your position correctly," Chen said, not looking up from her notes. "You've spent approximately 4 billion years seeding the galaxy with progressively more dangerous predator species as part of an evolutionary pressure experiment." "Correct," the architect replied, its voice manifesting as mathematical equations that solved themselves in increasingly frustrated loops. Each iteration was designed to push species development toward optimal survival configurations. And now you're concerned because humans have consistently failed to evolve in the expected directions. Your species has performed every calculation incorrectly. Chen finally looked up, her expression carrying the patient exhaustion of someone who had spent too many years in diplomatic service. "Could you be more specific?" The architect shifted configurations, briefly resembling a flowchart having a nervous breakdown. The Axiom Hunters were designed to force prey species toward enhanced physical capabilities, improved sensory apparatus, and accelerated reproductive cycles. Instead, humans developed recreational combat sports, comprehensive field guides, and what appears to be a thriving tourist industry. The flesh weavers were engineered to pressure species toward advanced cognitive recognition systems, psychological resilience protocols, and sophisticated social defensive structures. And instead, we invented friendship therapy for shapeshifters and started a cultural exchange program. The void touched represented the ultimate test, pure psychological pressure designed to force species toward either transcendent consciousness, evolution, or complete cognitive collapse. Chen nodded. Instead, we turned them into life coaches and started a podcast network. The architect's configuration collapsed into something that resembled a very complicated knot. Your species consistently responds to existential threats by transforming them into collaborative opportunities. Is that a problem? It defies the fundamental principles of evolutionary pressure. Predators are meant to create selection pressures that eliminate weak variants and strengthen successful survival traits. Instead, your species treats every lethal challenge as a potential friendship or business opportunity. Chen consulted her notes again. "According to our xenobiology department, you've been running this experiment across approximately 47,000 star systems over the past 4 billion years. 47,312. Precision matters in experimental design. And the typical results? The architect manifested several holographic displays showing evolutionary trees that resembled increasingly elaborate military organizational charts. Standard outcomes: enhanced physical capabilities, improved technological development, refined social hierarchies, optimal resource allocation strategies. All leading to galactic expansion, territorial acquisition, competitive advantage maximization, and eventual participation in what most species term the great struggle for dominance. Chen studied the displays with the expression of someone trying to solve a particularly obtuse puzzle. So your experiment consistently produces species that view existence as fundamentally competitive. Correct. Evolution through adversity creates optimal survival configurations. And then humans showed up. The architect agreed, its configuration briefly stabilizing into something that might have been a psi. Chen activated her own holographic display, showing what appeared to be a family tree that had been designed by someone with a profound misunderstanding of how families work. According to our analysis, humans have encountered 7 of your test species so far. Correct. Current status of these encounters. The Axiom Hunter survivors are participating in what we call conservation programs. Several have been successfully rehabilitated and are working as consultants for our xenobiology research initiatives. Conservation programs, the architect repeated. We don't like extinction. Even for things that try to kill us, seems wasteful. The Flesh Weavers have established permanent diplomatic residences on 12 human worlds and are collaborating on what you term cultural authenticity projects in your entertainment industry. They're excellent method actors, very dedicated to research. The Void Touched have founded what appears to be an interdimensional mental health initiative and are conducting therapy sessions for species experiencing what they call cosmic perspective disorders. The architect shifted through several configurations before settling on something that resembled a question mark, surrounded by smaller, increasingly agitated question marks. You weaponized compassion. We prefer applied empathy, but sure. This was not an intended experimental outcome. Chen leaned back in her chair, which somehow remained stable despite existing in 17 dimensions. Can I ask you something? Proceed. What happens to species that pass your tests? The ones that evolve according to your expected parameters? The architect activated a new display showing a galactic map dotted with thousands of markers in various colors. They join the greater competitive framework: territorial expansion, resource acquisition, technological advancement through conflict pressure, standard evolutionary optimization. And they're happy? Happiness is not a relevant metric for evolutionary success. But are they happy? The architect's configuration flickered through several unstable patterns. Define happy. Chen consulted her notes again. Our psychological analysis of the 47,000 successful test species indicates average satisfaction ratings of 2.3 out of 10, chronic anxiety levels approaching 94%, and what our therapists classify as pervasive existential dread syndrome. These metrics are irrelevant to... Meanwhile, Chen continued. Human satisfaction ratings average 7.2 out of 10. Anxiety levels hover around 23%. And our primary psychological challenges involve what we call decision paralysis due to excessive opportunities. The architect manifested briefly as a small, confused geometric shape. Excessive opportunities? Too many interesting things to do. Not enough time to do them all. It's a surprisingly common problem. Your species fails every evolutionary pressure test, befriends every existential threat, and somehow achieves higher satisfaction metrics than species that successfully adapt to competitive frameworks. Apparently. The architect contemplated this for several moments, cycling through configurations that suggested deep mathematical analysis. What do you want? Personally? I'd like to finish this meeting in time for lunch. Our cafeteria is serving something called Void-Touched Fusion Cuisine today, and I'm curious about interdimensional cooking techniques. I mean, as a species, what does humanity want from this encounter? Chen considered this question with the careful attention of someone who had been specifically briefed on its importance. We'd like to invite you to dinner. Dinner, social meal consumption, community bonding activity. We've found it's an excellent way to build understanding between species with different evolutionary backgrounds. You want to have dinner with a cosmic entity that has spent 4 billion years trying to kill you. Technically, you've been trying to improve us through selective pressure. That's different. And we appreciate the effort, even if we approached the problem from a different angle. The architect shifted into a configuration that somehow conveyed both incredulity and curiosity. Different angle. You tried to strengthen us by creating external threats. We strengthened ourselves by making friends with the threats. Both approaches work, but ours includes better snacks and more interesting conversation. And if I decline this dinner invitation? Chen shrugged. Your choice. But we've already sent invitations to the other test species. The flesh weavers are bringing something called traditional memory cake, and the void touched are providing what they call existential breadsticks. Should be educational. The architect contemplated the fundamental implications of a universe where its ultimate evolutionary experiment had somehow produced a species that responded to cosmic horror by organizing potluck dinners. What would you serve? It asked finally. Pizza, Chen said immediately. Definitely pizza. Universal crowd pleaser. We can do vegetarian options for the energy-based entities, and maybe something with complex molecular structures for species that eat concepts instead of matter. You've given this considerable thought. It's our first interdimensional dinner party. We want to make a good impression. The architect cycled through several configurations before settling on something that resembled acceptance. Very well. But I have conditions. Name them. I want to understand how your species consistently transforms competitive pressure into collaborative opportunity. We can arrange a presentation. Dr. Martinez from our Applied Friendship Studies Department has prepared a lecture called From Mortal Enemies to Group Projects, a practical guide to threat neutralization through inclusion. Applied Friendship Studies is an actual academic discipline? As of last Tuesday, we've had to formalize a lot of new fields recently. The architect considered this development. Anything else? Could you bring a dessert? Something exotic. The void touched. Really want to try food that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. And so the cosmic entity that had spent 4 billion years trying to create the perfect evolutionary pressure discovered that its ultimate creation was not a predator or prey species at all. It was a species that turned everything, including cosmic manipulation experiments, into dinner invitations. The universe, it seemed, had developed a sense of humor. The architect manifested briefly as something that might have been laughter, before settling into a configuration that suggested cautious optimism. I'll bring cookies. Interdimensional cookies. Perfect, Chen said, making a note. Dinner's at 7. Try not to accidentally destroy reality on your way over. No promises, the architect replied, but somehow it sounded like it was smiling.